introduce myself. My name is Phil Hatch. I'm the GMAT instructor for testperfect.com, and I've been teaching grad school tests for over 20 years. This is what I've done for my career, and I really enjoy it. And the GMAT is actually my favorite test of the grad school tests. I think that's because it's extra challenging and has some unique features that make it distinct from some of the other tests. Now, I've done this presentation for thousands of students over the years. This is one of the first times I've just done a recording. So I'm going to try to answer the same questions that I answer that students ask in the info sessions. But if you ever have any other questions, you can feel free to contact us, info@testperfect.com, and we should be able to answer your questions. So I always like to start with some of the basics. First of all, how do you sign up to take the GMAT? And this is actually pretty easy. You just go to mba.com. Great website. So this is the site run by the Graduate Management Admissions Council, and they administer the GMAT along with some other things. And they have an incredible site here with all sorts of information and prep tools and things that you can purchase from them. And so I'm not going to spend time walking you around this site. I'll give you a quick view of it just so you've seen it once. So here's the mba.com website. It changes every couple months. They rearrange stuff and menus and whatnot, but you can find your way around a website. So this is where you need to go to sign up for the GMAT. Now, actually, the first time you show up to mba.com, the first thing they're going to have you do is create an account. Now, it's free to create the account, but you're going to need that account before you're going to be able to sign up to take the test, before you can download the practice tests and things like that. So go ahead and jump in, get that account created right away, and then you can start doing some of those other things you need. When it comes time, when you're ready to take the test, you should go to mba.com and sign up for a test appointment. Now, we're making this video in November of 2021, so we're still in the middle of a COVID era, and they have a special, they say temporary accommodation for that you can actually take the GMAT at home. You'll still have a proctor watching you, but you take the GMAT at home on your own computer, and so that is available currently, and they do say it's temporary. But there's also, in most places, the option to take it at a testing center. And I would assume post-COVID that it's going to be the same thing, that you'll be able to take it at a testing center. So I'm going to describe more what a testing center experience is like. Now, when actually you sign up on mba.com, you just search for a testing center near you. Then it'll have a calendar. It'll show all the available days. You click on the day you want, and then it'll show you the available times, and you click on the time you want. So you should be able to get a day that works with your work schedule or school schedule, and a time of day that works for how well you think. Some people don't think well in the morning. You need to wake up before you can actually attack something like the GMAT, but you should be able to get a time that works for you. They even have weekend appointments available in most locations. So once you've signed up to take the test, you're going to show up on test day. And I want to just mention a couple things that kind of end up getting students in trouble, well, not in trouble, but cause problems. One thing is, when you sign up to take the GMAT, you have to use your official ID, your either driver's license if you're a US citizen, or a passport if you're a foreign national. And when you show up to take the test, your ID needs to match the account. They will not let you in if there's a discrepancy. And so make sure that you're just copying from your ID when you actually sign up to take the test. Actually, when you create your account on mba.com. Another thing that kind of throws people off is that they're going to have security at these testing centers. Some of them are at college university testing centers, but some of them are just in office buildings. The one I took it at was in an office building down by the freeway. So you show up and you check in with your official ID. They do have you put all your belongings in a locker. uh, other than your ID. You keep your ID with you. And then you're gonna go through the security, and you will have your picture taken. You will have you may have to have a wand, they do a wand. You may have to turn your pockets inside out. And then actually each time you go in and out of the testing room, they have a little machine that you put your hand over, and it reads the vein patterns in the palm of your hand. So it's biometrics, which is a really good way to prevent cheating, actually. So they have that. Like for me personally, I'm a little older, so I have to wear reading glasses in order to see what I'm reading. So I wear reading glasses, but they literally have me take them off, and the person examines them like this each time I go in and out of the testing room. So they're very serious about security. And I like to warn students about that so that they just don't get thrown off by it. If you're not expecting it, you're like, well, why are they treating me like this? They treat everybody like that. So you're not being discriminated against. They're just making sure that, trying to do what they can to prevent cheating. Okay, so once you get into the testing room, every testing room is obviously going to be a little different. I'll describe the one I took it at. It had probably 20 to 30 computer workstations. Each workstation had there were little barriers in between, but not much. It's not a cubicle or anything like that. And then there's a keyboard, mouse pad, and a monitor. Actually, at every desk, there's also a pair of headphones that you can use to block out some of the sound if that is something that you would like to do. I personally chose not to wear the headphones because I found it more distracting than helpful. Now, if you don't wear the headphones, you're going to hear a lot of people coming in and out, and there's whispered conversations going on because they have to get people set up on the computer and stuff. So if that's going to distract you, then wear the headphones. The other thing you'll have at your desk is the scratch paper, which you'll have scratch paper and markers because it's laminated scratch paper. It's kind of a weird system. So it's not paper and pencils. It's kind of a flip chart of like 5 sides, front and back. And you have fine point wet erase markers. Now here I have a dry erase marker, so I can just erase with an eraser. On the wet erase, you won't be able to erase on test day. That's kind of the idea. It functions like a pen would. And so you'll write, and then if you make a mistake, you'll just cross it off and start again. You don't erase and start again. Okay. They then get you set up on the computer. And before the test starts, there's a few things that you actually run through there on the computer. So one thing is you do a little demographic stuff, but you also select the 5 schools that you want to send your score to after the test. Now, of course, you don't know what your score is yet. And so you're kind of guessing, I want to send it to the top 5 schools in the country because I know I'm going to do well. So it's a little bit of a guessing game, but you probably already know where you're hoping to attend. And so you can send to those 5 schools. Now, those 5 schools are included in your cost of taking the GMAT. Currently, the cost of taking the GMAT is $275. So that includes the 5 schools. If you want to do additional schools, you can do it later on at home on your account at mba.com and send off your scores to as many schools as you want. Also, if you choose to not send it to the 5 schools, you can do the same thing. You can send later on at your at home. Now, of course, at home, not on testing day, they're going to charge you per school, and it's a little steep. I can't remember the exact price. I would guess around $35, $40 per school. So if you can take advantage of the 5 that are included in the cost of the test, definitely do. By the way, you don't need to have the school codes memorized. There's like a searchable database of grad school programs that you can just find the schools you're interested in. Okay, so after you get through all that, the test is about to start. Now, what I want to do is I want to kind of lay out the test kind of right from the start to the end and just talk about what the sections are like. Then we'll come back through and talk about how scoring works. And then we'll go through a final time and talk about the actual content of the test. So we're going to actually kind of run through the test 3 times. So quite a bit here. So the first thing is that, well, within the last 5 years, the GMAT has made a change, a really nice change, by the way, and that is they now let you choose the order of your sections. So I'm going to be putting up the test in the order that I personally take it, but I'll show you the other possible orderings that are available. So the first thing I'm going to do when I'm taking the test is the math section. Now, I do my math section first because I'm most scared of it. I can still run into a math problem that I can't do. I might be able to figure a way around it, but so I want to be as fresh and alert as possible when I do my math section. Okay. After each of these blocks, you get a break, and then I'm going to do my verbal section, and then another break, and then I'm going to do the block that includes two pieces. There's something called integrated reasoning. I'll abbreviate that IR, and also in that block is an essay. Okay. So that is my personal order. You have two other options. The first other option is you can just switch math and verbal and then still have these at the end. Or this block can move to the start before math. And if you do that, essay comes before integrated reasoning, and then you do that block, then math, then verbal. Okay, this is just my personal preference. And I kind of told you my reasons for why I do math first, but you can do whatever works for you and what makes you feel most comfortable. And there's not a right or wrong answer. Okay, so that's the order I'm doing it. That's a 3.5-hour test, by the way. Let me kind of give you kind of a breakdown of each of the sections and how many questions and that sort of thing. So in the math section, you have 31 questions in 62 minutes, which is exactly 2 minutes per question. So it's not enough time. We'll talk about how timing works in a few minutes, but understand you're going to be under severe time pressure on the GMAT. Okay. Then in the verbal section, there's 36 questions in 65 minutes, which is 1:48 per average question. Again, not enough time. Okay. Now, the essay and the integrated reasoning are each separately timed. The integrated reasoning section has 12 questions, 30 minutes, which is 2.5 minutes per question. Although that's a little deceptive because a lot of the questions in integrated reasoning have multiple parts. So it'll feel like a lot more than 12 questions. And then there's the essay where you simply have one question, 30 minutes. And it turns out that's 30 minutes per question. So that is your 3 hours. Again, you do get short little breaks in between here. They're optional breaks. You don't have to take them. But if you do take them, you can leave the testing room. You can run to the restroom, get a drink, that sort of thing. You are allowed to access your locker if you need to, but there's really strict rules, and be very careful accessing your locker. The thing that gets people in trouble more than anything is their cell phone. Don't get on your cell phone during the break, because they'll just cancel your score right there. You can have drinks and snacks in your locker, but again, be cautious. Don't break the rules on test day. This is a good day to follow all the rules exactly. Okay. By the way, just so you know, those nice people behind the desk are also your proctors, and they sometimes are known to walk the halls of the office building. So just because you sneak out into the hallway and get on your phone, you still might be caught. So just be careful. All right. So that's the whole test. By the way, at the end of the test, they show you your scores that they have. I mean, they don't have your essay because that has to actually be graded by a human, but they have your overall GMAT scores, and they'll put that up on the screen and give you an option whether you keep it or cancel it. Okay, so you can cancel it like it never happened, or you can keep it. And if you do keep it, your scores will be good for 5 years. And whenever you send scores to schools, all the scores from the previous 5 years will be included. Now, if you have a really, really bad score, you probably want to cancel it. But if it's within 50 points of what you're hoping for, definitely don't cancel that. first of all, it might be that you still could get into a school even though you didn't expect it, but also schools might, even if you take the GMAT again, they might like to see that increase. Oh, they went up 50 points from their previous test. They must be working hard and that sort of thing. So, or I mean, if it's 200 points below what you need, it's not going to do you any good. You can definitely cancel that one. Okay. So let's jump in now to how scoring works on the test. And this is a little confusing. So we have these different sections, and you actually get a sub-score for every single section. So on math, you get a score. I believe the range is 6 to 51. Verbal is like 6 to 51. I'm pretty sure those are exact, but those aren't the ones that matter. We'll get to the ones that matter in a second. Integrated reasoning goes from 0 to 8, and essay goes from 0 to 6. Okay. That's 4 scores, but the 5th score is the one that matters. They take your math and your verbal score and put it into some kind of number cruncher to come up with your overall GMAT score. That is listed on a 200 to 800 scale. The average is currently around 560. It's fluctuated a little over the years, but yeah, 560 is about average. So we'll put the average up there. Now, 560 may not get you into the business school of your dreams, but there are business schools that will accept students at a 560. But remember, just being average on the GMAT is pretty hard to do because this is an intelligent group of people taking this test. It's college graduates who are going on to business school or hope to go on to business school. So to get a 560, you're actually doing really well. Okay. Some of the top schools, kind of in your Stanford, Harvard, Wharton range, their averages are in the 730, 740 range. There's a lot of great schools that are ranked probably in the 20 to 30 to 40 range that have scores somewhere in the 650 to 680 range that are excellent options for a lot of people. All right, so you can do a lot of research on your own to find out what score you need to get on the test for the school you're trying to go to and that sort of thing. So I want to emphasize something here, and that is the only scores that affect your overall score are math and verbal. Excuse me. The integrated reasoning and essay have no effect on it. So these are additional scores that schools can choose to look at. A lot of schools actually don't. They don't care about how well you write or what your integrated reasoning score is. Some schools do. It, I think, tends to be that the higher ranked the school, the more likely they're going to look at these scores. However, definitely find out from the schools you're applying to whether they care about them. Some schools actually care nothing at all about those two sections. And if you're only applying to schools like that, such as that, then you can actually skip these two sections and make your test 2.5 hours long instead of 3.5. But be very cautious about ever skipping those sections because you may need them and wish you had taken those sections. Okay. Now, I've always found a lot of confusion about how the math and the verbal scores combine to give you this overall score. And I do some examples, and these are examples from actual students that I've had take the test over the years. Now, I'm going to not give it to you by these numbers. I'm going to give you their scores by their percentile, and then talk about how the percentiles work. So I had a student a few years ago get 70th percentile math and 90th percentile verbal. Now, so that's top 10% in verbal, top 30% in math is still solid. So they put it in the number cruncher and they came up with the overall percentile. Yeah, I always ask students in the live sessions, well, what do you think it was? And most people obviously come up with 80th percentile because that seems obvious. It'll be the average of those two. It was not. It was 90th percentile. So how could that be? Why didn't the math drag us down? The basic idea was that it's a combination of skills rather than an average of skills. I like to express it this way. This student was in the top 10% here, but it turns out that those people that are really good at verbal are not always good at math. So for her to be still in the top 30% of the math kind of kept her in the top 10% of her group. And that's why it came out as 90th percentile. After I saw that score, I was like, well, I'm curious. What if she had gotten 90th and 90th instead? Well, that's not 90th percentile overall. That's 96th percentile overall, because that combination of skills is much rarer than having one of the two skills individually. Okay, so how about another couple of examples? So one student got 65th percentile math and 99th percentile verbal. Okay, so if you're 99th percentile, you may have not missed a single question. You're just acing the section. Okay, but math kind of dropped them down a little. But how much do you think? It was 98th percentile. By the way, if you're curious, that was a 740, and these are the actual numbers from a student on the actual test. So you see a discrepancy there. So here's what I like to tell people. Your strengths can really pull you up, which informs how we should actually study for the test. Most people come in and say, oh, I'm bad at one of these two sections. I'm actually pretty good at the other. Don't ignore the section you're strong at. Get it up as high as possible so that it'll do this and pull up your score in this sort of way. Now, obviously you need to study your weakness, but don't ignore your strength, because that could be how you get the score that you want. So that's a little tidbit here that can really help certain people. Study your strength as well as your weakness. Unless you're already perfect at the section. If you're already getting perfect scores, don't put a lot of study time, just do some practice questions to maintain that. But anybody else, if you have room to move up, try to move up as high as possible, and that can really help your score out. Okay, now, the next thing we need to talk about is what I call the most vicious part of the test. And that is, the GMAT is an adaptive test. Essentially, the better you're doing, the harder the test becomes. Now, this only applies to the math and the verbal section, not the essay or integrated reasoning. But within your math and the verbal, it adjusts to you after every single question. So I'm going to be, apparently the algorithm they use is complicated and everything. So I'm going to do a simplified version of this. And I'm just going to describe it in the math, but the same principle applies in the verbal. So let's say in the math, there's 31 questions. So 10, 20, 30, and 31. And so just to simplify it, I'm going to say the scoring band goes from 200 to 800. So we're not going to even pull it into the math individually. The average is about like a 560. When you start your section on test day, they have a history of having the first question be really hard, above average difficulty. Okay, so my personal best score on the GMAT, I've taken it 4 times. My personal best is a 790. I only missed one question on the entire test. But I'll tell you what, the first question that popped up that day stumped me for a while. So I'm obviously really good at the test, right? And I looked at this question, I'm like, and I actually started it and got about 2 minutes into the test, and I was stumped. So I actually just said, I had to give myself a pep talk, really, like, okay, come on, Phil, you're pretty good at this. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start this question from scratch. And then I was able to do it and go on. But here's the thing. What if you do get that question right? And the next one, next one, next one, next one. They keep ramping up the difficulty. So 5 to 10 questions into the test, if you're doing really well, you're into some monstrously difficult questions. They get hard on the GMAT. I'm not going to lie to you. That's a good thing though. If the questions are getting hard, it means you're doing well. But what naturally happens is you start missing some because they get so hard. Now, this isn't everybody, but you start missing some, getting some, and you start bouncing around and you level off. Now, you can dip below that or jump above it, but you kind of end up at a level. It's where you're getting some and missing some. Okay. Now, you also need to maintain that level all the way to the end of the section. So a really bad thing that could happen, and happens to a lot of students, is they get halfway through the section and they're just doing really well, they think, and they probably are, except they've run themselves out of time. And so they're like, I gotta hurry. And so they start hurrying. And then this happens. And then they have to guess on the last 6 to 8 questions. And their score crashes. Literally, maybe 100 to 200 points below what they should have scored on the test, if they had just managed their time correctly. So what can we do to avoid that? Well, this might seem counterintuitive, but you've got to make sure you have enough time to get all the way to the end of the section. So if this chart, if you cannot maintain that to the end of the section, you've got to find a different chart, and your chart probably looks something more like this. Something bouncing around in there. Instead of having it high and then crashing, you just kind of find a place where you can do it, maintain it. So this is so frustrating and so psychologically difficult for a lot of people, because to get this line, which gives you your best possible score, you had to give up on questions that you could have gotten if you just had the time. If you just had 4 minutes per question instead of 2 minutes, you could ace the test. But unfortunately, you have 2 minutes. So you've got to just figure out when you give up on questions. And I like to describe it like this. You have 31 questions, 62 minutes. I personally check after every 5 questions where I'm at. And so basically every 5 questions should take 10 minutes. So when you finish question 5, you should have used 10 minutes. So since you started with 62 minutes, you should have had 52 minutes left. What if you're behind? So I want to know right at the start if I'm behind, so that I can make small adjustments near the start of the test instead of crashing at the end like this. So if I find myself behind, now you can't do this if you're going for an 800, but if you, almost anybody, even the 750, 760, 770 people, if you find yourself behind, what you have to do is get back on the clock so that you have 2 minutes for each of the last questions also. So the way you do that is not by speeding up. The GMAT is too tricky for you to speed through it. So the way you get yourself back on the clock is by giving up on questions. And I do mean giving up. Now, a lot of students hear that and they're like, well, I'll try it for a minute, and then if I can't, I'm stuck, I'll give up. Well, pretty soon you've already taken 2 minutes on the question before you give up. You probably need to give up earlier on in the question. So a lot of people who get their best scores, they just say, okay, I'm giving up on, you don't have to give up on the very next question, but maybe one of the next couple. And I always tell my students, you'll know which one to give up on because you'll get to the question, you'll swear it's nothing like anything you've ever seen before. Or it takes a whole paragraph to read the setup for a math question. You're like, this is going to take 1.5 minutes just to even see what they're saying. And so if you run into a question like that, just within 5 seconds, cut your losses and go to the next question. Now you have to give a guess. So isn't that frustrating? You're just giving up on a question, a point, a real point. But you're managing to save time to get all the way to the end. The weird thing about these 2 graphs, the one that gets high and then drops, and the one that maintains, is you may be giving up on about the same number of questions. In this one, you're giving up on the last 10. In this one, you're spreading your 10 guesses across the whole way. And that is really how you can probably get your best score. It's counterintuitive. It's tough. especially people that are a little OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, kind of like me. I have to watch about that kind of stuff so that I don't get like, I can't let go, but you have to let go on this test. Okay, you have to manage that time in a really stressful situation. Okay? That is part of what you're being tested on, by the way. And if you can think of it that way, that this is kind of part of the game, I have to lose a few battles to win the war overall, it's a good way to think of the GMAT. Okay, so now let's go into each of the blocks and talk about kind of what you're being tested on within that block. So there's several different things on the test. We're going to start with the section I do last, which is the integrated reasoning and essay. So again, integrated reasoning and essay. These are together in one block. You get a half hour for each, and it's a separately timed half hour. Now, for both of these sections, remember, these don't affect your overall score. So a lot of students don't take them nearly as seriously, and that you might find yourself in that same situation. However, if you're going to be taking these and the schools care about them, then you really need to put some effort in here also. I would definitely be practicing these, especially every time I took a practice test. I would do these sections also. I would put some of my study time towards integrated reasoning and essay. Just put some time into it. If you put some time into it, kind of a legitimate amount of time, then your scores on these two sections will reflect your overall score. So for example, if you're going to get in the 700s, you'll probably almost for sure get a 7 or an 8 here and a 5 or a 6 here. If you're going to get in the 6 to 700 range, you'll probably get a 6 to 7 here and a 4 to 5 here. It happens almost every time with people who have put in the study time. If you haven't put in the study time, you're in danger of having one of these two scores come out really badly and be a big red flag for the schools. Like the essays go from 0 to 6. If you're a 4, 5, or 6, you're probably okay. If you're a 2, there's a big problem. If you're a 3, there's a problem. And so if you get one of those low scores, the schools are going to be like, something's wrong here. We should look closer. And so don't let that happen. Same with integrated reasoning. Integrated reasoning has some question types that are very different than the rest of the test. And if you've never practiced them before, they can feel really odd, and you may not even understand what the question is asking. So don't ignore these as you study. Now, the integrated reasoning is called integrated reasoning because it integrates math and verbal. It also integrates charts and graphs and spreadsheets and flow charts and just various things. You have different tabs that you can click through. Sometimes you can, like in Excel, you can rearrange data in the chart, things like that. This kind of has to be taught on a computer because it's a computer-based question format. You do get a calculator on the integrated reasoning section, but not on your math section. The section of math that counts, you don't get a calculator, but you do get an on-screen calculator here. So it's really handy to do small calculations, but it doesn't ever solve a problem for you. So I feel like the integrated reasoning section is a fantastic new section. And as you practice it, you can actually get really good at it. It doesn't require skills that you probably don't have. Most people know how to read a bar graph or a circle graph or a flow chart. However, put in that effort, and then you should do fairly well on this section. Excuse me. All right, the essay. Now let's just talk briefly about the essay. The essay is an analysis of an argument. What they do is they give you a small paragraph. In that small paragraph, they have someone else making an argument, which means they're using evidence to support a conclusion or a recommendation. So your job is to describe how well reasoned that argument is. If it's on the GMAT, it's always, I mean 100% of the time, poorly reasoned. You're never praising someone's reasoning. So you're going to be pointing out what's wrong with the argument. You're going to say they made these bad assumptions. They overlooked these alternate explanations. They failed to account for this. They relied on some bad survey data. They did this. So you're pointing out how they failed in their argument, although you don't take the other side. Okay, you don't argue with the person. You say your tone would be more like this. Well, it's a worthy goal to increase our market cap. This author's argument doesn't make a well-reasoned argument for doing whatever they recommended, for expanding in the South. Here's why. They overlooked this. They failed to realize the South could have different demographics. So you just point out how they failed without actually taking the other side. You're graded on things like how well you make your points, how well you support your points, how well you're organized. By the way, as far as organization goes, if you're in any doubt on how to organize your essay, just do the 5-paragraph essay from high school. Intro, 3 body paragraphs, conclusion. It's a great way to organize one of these essays. with each body paragraph being one of the things wrong with the passage. And there will be multiple things wrong with each of these passages. Okay. Some of the other things you're graded on kind of how well you put sentences together. They call it syntactic variety. A mix of long and short sentences and things like that. And then also grammar. So you don't want to have sentence fragments or run-on sentences, and subjects agree with verbs and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's your integrated reasoning and essay sections. Again, those don't affect your overall score, but they may be very important. And if they are important to you personally and the schools you're applying to, put some serious effort into them. Okay, so let's next talk about the verbal section. So remember, in the verbal section, you have 36 questions in 65 minutes. It's 1:48 per question. And the questions are divided into 3 categories. There's reading comprehension, which is exactly what you think it is. You read a passage and answer questions based on it. There's critical reasoning. We'll talk about each of these in a second. Critical reasoning, and then there's sentence correction. Now, as far as how these are divvied up, there's probably 13 to 14 of these, 13 or 14 sentence correction, and 8 to 10 critical reasoning. Those are approximates. These aren't exact. And so that's about what you should expect. Okay. Now, the questions are interspersed. So you'll get a few of these back to here, over here, back to here, over to here. So as you're doing your verbal section, excuse me, you just have to be ready for whatever pops up on the screen next. Now, when you do a reading comprehension passage, the passage and the following questions are about the passage. They don't have you go back later on in the section to a passage you read earlier. So if there's a passage with 4 questions on it, and you probably will never see more than 4 questions per passage. So this is probably representing 3 or 4 passages of about 3 or 4 questions each, something like that. So as you do your passage, what happens is you'll have your passage and your first question on the screen when it first shows up. After you answer the first question, second question pops up, passage stays. So you always have access to the passage as you're doing the questions based on the passage. Don't need to memorize it. Okay. Now, the passages in reading comprehension can be about almost any topic. They can be about science, history, social science, just random topics. They obviously have people that are specialists in certain areas. As you read a lot of GMAT passages, you see a lot of things talked about more than one time. If they're getting really hard, they may even get into like law passages. So legal passages tend to be hard for an average student. When I got my best score, I didn't miss a single verbal question. And I had 2 of my, I think 4 passages that were legal passages. Now, I personally have a law degree, so those were actually easy for me. But most people, those would be very difficult passages. Okay, so then you have critical reasoning. Critical reasoning are like short little reading passages, usually about a paragraph long, with one question after each one. The questions are a little bit more based in formal logic. So that would mean like how you can strengthen or weaken arguments, how you can, what inferences can you draw, what role did a statement play, what information is important in evaluating an argument, various things along those lines. Okay, and then you have sentence correction. Sentence correction is essentially grammar. What they do in every sentence correction question is they have a sentence, and it's always a single sentence, and a portion of it is underlined. Then they have 5 answer choices, and the answer choices are different versions of the underlined portion, with A always being an exact copy of what was up above, and then each of these change it somewhat. And by seeing what they're changing, you can kind of see what grammatical principles are being tested. And so you'll find the best version of the 5 answer choices. Now, they test both grammar and usage. So what I'm saying there is there could be more than one answer that's grammatically correct, but one of the remaining ones is just awkward or uses incorrect idioms or something like that. So even though it technically is allowable, it's just not the best version. So I kind of am also telling you there's some inherent subjectivity going on here, and kind of in all of verbal, there's a little subjectivity. But you can actually, with a lot of practice, get a great sense of what the GMAT writers consider the correct answer. And there's a legitimate, justifiable reason why that answer choice is better than the others. Okay, so you definitely want to put in a bunch of practice in verbal. So that's what our verbal section looks like. Then we have our math section. So the math section, again, has 31 questions in 62 minutes, 2 minutes per question. Remember though, it's adapting, so as you're doing well, it gets harder. So that can really mess with you. So there are 2 question types in math. About 60% of your questions, so 60% are just regular problem solving questions. Those are what you're expecting from a math question. They ask you a math question, give you 5 answers, and you choose the correct answer. They might say, what's the area of the triangle? You calculate it, it comes out as 42. So click the one that says 42. That's how you get your point. Okay. That's what most people expect from a math problem. But about 40% of your problems are data sufficiency. Now, this is a whole new kind of math problem. Now, the problem itself is the same, except when they ask the problem, they have not yet given you enough data to answer the problem. So in other words, it's currently an impossible problem to answer. But then they give you pieces of data. They give you 2 separate statements, and then there are 5 answer choices. So the 2 statements, though, are additional pieces of data that you can consider along with what you already know. And the idea is, do these additional pieces of data now give me enough information to solve the problem, or do I still not have enough information? In other words, do I have sufficient data? So this question type is, as far as I know, unique to the GMAT and takes some getting used to. Most people are not very good when they start, but can get really good at this. So the answer choices, by the way, are variations of statement 1 is sufficient, statement 2 is not, 2 is sufficient, 1 is not, or together they're sufficient. There's various answers, but it's just how the 2, the information they provide, is it enough to answer the question? Really a weird question type. You know, the nice thing about data sufficiency, though, is you don't actually have to answer the question. This might seem really weird. They asked a math question, it might say, what's the area of the triangle? You don't actually ever have to come up with the 42. You just have to say, oh, I have everything I need to get there, sufficient, without actually spending the extra time to do the calculations. It's a very unique way to think about the test, but I think very valid and relatable to business school and the business world in general, honestly. Okay, so those are the question types. Let's talk about the areas of math that are tested. There's arithmetic. So remember, you don't get a calculator. So they go back to elementary school stuff, adding fractions together, finding common denominators, calculating remainders. Yeah, there's remainder questions on the GMAT. They have a lot of percent and ratio type questions also that I would include as part of arithmetic. Then there's algebra, which is kind of obvious, right? It's the basics, the basics of math. So equations, systems of equations, quadratic equations, things along those lines. Geometry, which obviously has a whole lot to do with business school. But this is what they test us on, so we learn geometry. So there's a lot of things you need to know. Test yourself. Do you know how to calculate the area of a trapezoid? You should by test day. Okay. Then there's number properties. And number properties include things like positives and negatives, odds and evens, fractions and decimals. Well, not fractions and decimals, but more like multiples and factors and prime numbers. I'd also include exponents and square roots in here. So those are tested a lot on the GMAT. Then you have some stats. And this is not like a stats class, but it's more along the lines of averages, weighted averages, medians, ranges, standard deviations. They also do get into probabilities and permutations, combinations. So those are tough questions in my opinion. Some of the tougher ones on the test, but everybody's a little different. Then you have some word problems. And the word problems, I'm lumping a lot of stuff together here. This could include rate, time, distance, trains coming together, rate, time, work, machines working on a production order, overlapping groups, subdivided sets, occasionally profit and interest, like sales minus cost equals profit, that sort of thing. And then the last thing that's I'm going to put on the list, they seem to be including more charts and graphs as time goes by. Not a ton of charts and graphs, but there's a few within your math section. And so you need to be able to read a chart and a graph, but I've never seen anything very complicated at all in charts and graphs on the main section of the GMAT. Okay. So that is the areas of math you're tested on. Now, there's something I really like to do when I do this. And I like to spend just a little time letting people know about strategy on the GMAT. Here's the deal. You saw that list of math and you're like, you may have noticed that it seems to have nothing to do with business school. They're not testing accounting principles or finance or any of that. So why is the test for business school this test? And I like to think of it in two different ways. One way is they can't just test business concepts because they're giving an advantage to business majors or really a disadvantage to everybody else. And they don't want to do that. They want people of all backgrounds in business school. If you're an art history major, you might make a great MBA. If you're an engineer, there's a great chance you'll do fine in business school. So they're looking for people that have other skills, background skills. And that's what I really think the GMAT's testing. It's testing background skills. So it's presented as a math test, but I think it's a problem-solving test, a strategic thinking test, an ability to work under pressure test. And so if you can start thinking of it more in those terms, rather than just here's a math test, you may be seeing behind the curtain and seeing what the writers of the test are trying to find out what skills you actually have. So I actually do a lot of strategy work, both in the course and then when I'm personally taking my test. I get to a math problem and I look for an easy way to get the point. Now, more than half the time, I'm still going to be doing it the math way, But there's a lot of times I'm using strategy on the test to get a point that I might not be able to do in the math way. So to illustrate that, I've actually written a math problem, and I wanted to actually do that problem with you. Okay. Let me hide the sidebar there. Okay. So here you should be seeing a problem, and let's look at it. It says if a plus b equals c and a minus b equals d, then a times b divided by 2 equals what? Now take a look at the answers. I always look at the answers before I start a problem-solving problem. The answers have variations of c squareds and d squareds divided by something. Okay, so I already know how I'm going to solve this problem because I've run through some questions for myself in my head. First question is, do I really know how to do the algebra involved or the math involved? And if I saw this, I would say I probably do. I wrote this question, so I obviously do, but it might take me a little while. By the way, I've done this question with thousands of students, and I would say the large majority of them are not comfortable with this algebra. Like a lot of the students who are engineering background or economics background or math backgrounds, they can do this math. But a lot of students, I would say the average college graduate in the US would have trouble doing this math. So, but there was a hint in the answer choices. The answer choices all had variations of C's and D's. As soon as I see variables in my answers, variables meaning letters instead of just numbers, I almost always shift to a strategy to solve the problem. And the strategy is to use my own numbers. Now, there's a lot of strategies. There's use your own numbers, there's back solve, there's estimate, and you can practice each of these and get better at them. But the number one strategy, in my opinion, is use your own numbers. So I'm going to just demonstrate that on this particular problem. So this may seem silly, but I'm just going to make up numbers for A, B, C, and D. So I'll make a little roster, and I'm just going to tell myself A is 5 and B is 2. I like small, easy to handle numbers. That's the way to go. Unless you need bigger numbers. Like in a percent question, you're going to choose 100. In a large, in a fraction question, you're going to see how you have to divide it up, or what the denominators look like in the answer choices. I'm getting a little in depth here, but let's go back to this question. I like small numbers. They're easy to work with. That's the point. And I also like small prime numbers. Okay, so now that I've chosen A and B, I can't just choose any old C because the question said the A and B add up to C. So my A and B add up to C, so C has to be 7. And then it also said that A minus B equals D. So 5 minus 2 is 3. So D must be 3. So what I've done is I've created a list of numbers that exactly fit the setup and the equations. Now I can solve this with elementary school math. Because the question said A times B divided by 2 equals what? Well, I know what A is and I know what B is. So I'll just plug in 5 times 2 divided by 2. I'll reduce and I'll know that the answer is 5. So the answer to the question is 5. So now I just select the answer choice that says 5. Do you see what we're going to do? We're just going to plug in our own C and our own D and see which one comes up with a 5. Now, just to save time, I'm going to show you the correct answer. It's D. C squared minus D squared over 8. Remember, we're plugging in our numbers. So this will come out 49 minus 9 over 8. 40 over 8 is 5. None of the other answer choices say 5. So I can solve this problem this way. This is my preferred method of solving this question. Now, if you were really great at math, your preferred method might be to actually do the algebra. But I'm not as great at math as a lot of people. So I love to do questions like this. If this is available, I choose this rather than doing the math. I'm more efficient, quicker, and everything. So strategy can just get you points on the test. So it's a point I really like to make as I'm prepping students, that yes, you need a very solid math review. It's true. But you also need some strategy and practicing. You need to practice the strategies. What you're going to do is you're going to get questions that you have no business getting, that you don't know how to do. You know how to select the correct answer, but remember, it's not a math test where you have to show your work. It's a problem-solving test. This is what business schools want. They want these students that can think this way. And so I really like to see behind the curtain and realize this is kind of what they're looking for. This is not cheating on the test. This is strategizing, thinking critically, seeing alternate ways to get to the answer. And so I think there's a lot of value to that. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just briefly tell you about our online course. So at testperfect.com, let me write that up for you. We have an online GMAT course. Now, let me give you a little code, online promo. This will take $100 off the cost of the course. That's promo. And so if you use that code as you're signing up for the online GMAT course, it'll take it down to a very reasonable cost. Now, I want to show you some of the benefits of our course. So let me show you the materials that come with it. So you get the official guide to the GMAT, along with the 2 official supplements, a math and a verbal supplement. You also get the book I've written that goes along with the course that kind of supplements these and assigns questions and all of that. Okay. Now, the course is arranged on an 8-week schedule. In fact, I'm going to actually call it up on the screen and just kind of show you how the course works. So let me get over to our site. So we have 8 weeks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 through 8, and above the 8 weeks are the official guide explanations, and that menu is reflected over here. So each week you have various things that you're going to be doing. So each week there's a lecture. Now the lecture is recorded on demand. So like week 7 is our geometry lecture. So if you wanted to learn about geometry, there's all these videos of like, here's a video of me teaching triangles from a few years ago. So there's like a half-hour video on just triangles. So you can watch that and really get a sense of how triangles are tested on the GMAT. Then there'll be, a lesson on quadrilaterals and circles and coordinate geometry. Okay, so there is the lecture. So that's divided up into segments, obviously. But when I teach it live, it comes out as about a 3-hour lecture each week for each of the 8 weeks. So expect about that much time to watch the actual lecture videos. Then for a lot of the weeks, there's included a quiz. Now the quiz is just out of our book, but there are answers to the quiz here on this website. Okay, so then after the quiz, there is homework. Now the homework is all pulled out of the big official guide. There's close to 1,000 questions in here that are all official GMAT questions from the past. This is as good as you're going to get in terms of replicating the real test day experience. So with all those questions, that's a lot of homework I assign. You're going to spend a lot of time each week doing homework. Now, I've always felt that the verbal explanations they do in that book are really great, but their math explanations are not the best. Remember like the question we just did where I showed you a strategic way to do it? The GMAT writers never give that away. They always show you the official math way to do it. And so sometimes it's not very helpful. So what I've done, if you go back to our menu here, the official guide explanations, I've gone through every math question in the book and I solve it for you in a video. So there's videos of me solving every single math question in that book, every question you get in your homework. So that's the homework. Then after the homework, there's also something called a drills. Okay, so what the drills is when I've taught this class live online instead of just a recorded version, I've also done a drills. Now the drills are done from these 2 small supplement books. Hey, that's when I had a beard. So they're pulled from the 2 small supplement books, and it's just 2-hour-long videos of me interacting with the students doing practice problems. So I'll start a question, give the students a minute or 2 to solve it, and then I explain it. And then I go on to the next one, and we do it again and again for 2 hours. But there's a timing element to that. So as an online student, as you're watching that, try to keep up with the students that are there. So try to watch it real time as much as possible. And so I'm trying to add a little bit of time pressure with the drills. Okay, so those are the things that you're going to be doing with the online class: the lecture, the quiz, the homework, and the drills. Expect it to be a part-time job for a couple of months. Yeah, I said it. A couple of months studying for the GMAT, if you have the time. If you're up against a deadline, then you need to compress that, of course. But even once you finish the course, you then need to do as many practice tests as possible. Okay. Now, there are 6 available official content practice tests on MBA.com. 2 of them are free. The other 4, you can pay $90 for all 4. And that gives you 6 practice tests, and you can take each of those twice. So it's kind of like 12 practice tests, and you'll get slightly different questions the second time you take each one. You can also find the tests written by the test prep companies, but they're just never as good as the official content on MBA.com. So thanks for joining us for this. And I would love if you are interested in the class. I'm the teacher. This is an online promo code that'll take $100 off the class. It would be great to have you in the class.